we're newly appointed Joint Audit Committee. Very warm welcome to the two new members, and a warm welcome to Wasim Ali, the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner, and Simon Dow, who's the Head of Policy, who are not normal attendees, but have both come because we had asked at the last meeting to just have an overview of the new accountability framework that the PCC was planning to put in place. So it's very good to have them here. We've got some apologies. We've got apologies from Jonathan Jardine, the Chief Executive, from the Police and Crime Commissioner himself, because we did invite him to come in person, but he's got other commitments today. And from Fiona Pook, and someone will remind me of Fiona's title, but
Deputy Head of Corporate.
But everyone, we have asked, normally officers who are presenting to us, if they've got the time, will come and sit in on the whole meeting, and I think they usually find that quite useful because it gives them a bit of context. But we're not in our usual meeting room today, which is why we're not being live streamed. And it also means we've got a lot less chairs available for people to be sitting on. So we have said to the internal presenters, we'll try and work out when we're likely to get to you, and then you can come in and not be forced onto the sidelines. We haven't got external audit here yet. Oh yes, we have. But you're on your own. It's just me. Yes, sometimes there are one or two. So it's good to have Lauren in here too. So those are the apologies and the welcome. Now, I don't believe that any of the members of the current committee have been asked to complete or refresh a formal declaration of their interests. So that will follow, and we'll see that. But can I just check whether anyone has identified a declaration of interest in anything that's on the agenda today that they need to declare? Does sometimes happen, but not on this occasion. The minutes of the previous meeting, there's no member of the committee other than myself who was at the previous meeting. Some of the officers were in attendance, so if any of them think we've actually misrecorded anything, speak now or forever hold your peace. So I will have to, on my own, declare that they're correct records. And we'll note them. There's nothing on that agenda that we think we need to pick up on separately today. Which brings us very quickly then to the first substantive item, which is the accountability and governance framework for the PCC, which is undergoing some change. So we've got Simon and Wasim here, and what we're particularly interested in as the audit committee, or what the audit committee thought it would be useful to know about, is how is it envisaged that new arrangements will improve the accountability and the openness of the proceedings of the PCC? So I don't know whether Wasim was planning to say anything or whether he's leaving it to Simon to present.
I think it was straight to me.
Over to you. Yeah. Okay then.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. So I trust people have had a chance to have a look at the paper, and I shan't cover off the police and crime traffic because that's obviously the next paper. But I think the best place to start is around the appointment of people to support Simon in his role. So under the previous term in office, he had assistant police and crime commissioners, victims commissioner, and then he had members who attended his top level board, which was obviously the strategic police and crime board. So he wanted to take perhaps a slimmed down and simpler approach, which he felt would enable him to be seen to be much more directly holding Chief Constable to account. So that is something that he's sought to do through having a Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner, and then Victims Advocate. So those are the appointed positions that he is looking to have. Victims Advocate is still out to recruitment. So that last time round was a political post and an actual appointment. This time round, it is not that. It is a politically restricted member of staff. Is how it will operate. It will report to the chief executive and also to the PCC himself. So he will he will direct the work that they're undertaking, but they will be politically restricted. So we're currently out to advert on that post. We've had to go out for a second time. So it's quite a particular post, I guess, looking for just that right person, I think, given as it's politically restricted, but there is clearly going to be a public-facing element too. And both of those posts will, so the DPCC and the Victims Advocate will join the PCC on his accountability and governance board. So that replaces what was the strategic policing and crime. That will continue to be live streamed so that the public absolutely can, see firsthand that holding to account function and feed into that. There will be a couple of times a year focus on performance, because that's something that Simon felt he wasn't able to really get under the skin of in the way that the SPC meetings previously ran, because there was, I think from his perspective, too many papers and he wasn't able to really get into the detail. So the intention is that through having a couple of times a year a dedicated session just on that really enables us to get into the detail, of which there's huge amounts that we get from the force in that regard. I think it's also fair to say that in terms of what is coming to those boards, we're looking for a much more of a laser focus, I guess, on what has been achieved and what the challenges are, and how they've delivered the police, how the force have delivered the police and crime. So that process has changed as well, the behind the scenes process there. I think the other key meeting-based way that Simon will hold the Chief Constable to account will continue to be the weekly meetings that takes place between the two of them, supported by various people around this table on either side of the house there. And that will continue to enable those things that come up on a regular basis that need to be dealt with in an immediate fashion to be discussed, and not just wait for the monthly AGBs. I guess the next bit to talk about is, obviously Simon has lost some, therefore, of that breadth of numbers of people that are feeding into his holding to account processes, in terms of he hasn't got those advisors that were also on the Strategic Policing and Crime Board. So what he's done is he's set up, or in the process of setting up, his Commissioners Advisory Panel. That's 20 to 25 individuals from the community. So we've just completed a recruitment process around that. And we've got our first induction session next Thursday. We've got a good cross-representation geographically. We're missing someone from Solihull. So we'll be going out again. We won't go out again. We'll be doing some targeted work to recruit someone from Solihull in relation to that. But we feel that we've got a good mix of different backgrounds and specialisms and expertise to support the PCC. So they will be meeting probably 4 to 6 times a year, and they will be looking at specific issues. The first meeting in October will be a more general meeting around the overall police and crime plan, so they'll have opportunity to feed into and help shape that. But those will be, they won't be public meetings, they will be closed meetings, and they will enable Simon in a different way to get, and actually to get a broader input from a much wider range of people, but in a fairly, in a managed way. So those people will be they'll be paid for their work for each panel that they attend. So we don't envisage that every single panel member will attend every single session that we hold. It may be that certain things that just don't interest them, or they don't feel that they've got anything they particularly wish to put forward on any particular issue. So we think that absolutely enhances Simon's ability to undertake his role. I won't talk to you about yourselves. But there's a part of the report.
Well, let's just pause there for a minute.
Go for it.
And just to make this point, we are now moving to an audit committee that is wholly independent, which is what is recommended as best practice, and I have been supportive of. But what that does mean is that the previous audit committee had its members drawn from the old strategic policing board. So there was a degree of cross-fertilisation that was helpful in the sense that there were members of the audit committee who had an understanding of the wider context and knew what was being discussed on a monthly basis, which is something that potentially we're going to miss now. So the members of the audit committee are not going to be quite so plugged in. Now, sometimes that's a good thing. But there is also something about the audit members having enough context of what's happening currently to ensure that, you know, both what they are doing and what internal audit are doing are wholly relevant. So, I mean, has any thought been given to, I mean, other than myself coming and presenting an audit a report once a year, to actually how we will ensure that audit committee members are not losing that sort of underlying sense of, you know, of connection? I'm guessing.
We could, it's for you probably as an audit committee to lay out for us what you think that need looks like and suggest. And it could be met, for example, by giving the PCC does an update that we send to Police and Crime Panel. So we could deliver that to yourself so that you would be cited on what we do. I guess potentially you could ask for the same thing from the force. So that I think is in your gift to determine what you think is the kind of right sized in that space.
That'd be a good
Absolutely,
start.
and that good practice that you referred to, you know, sit for kind of say this in their governance forums as well. It is, you know, anything that we can do to help the audit committee members, you know, understand kind of the business that we operate in from both a force perspective and the OPCC, given the joint nature of the committee, would absolutely do, do anything.
I think that's a good start. And then clearly, you know, we'd be guided by 2 new members, maybe will come home, actually just picking up, making sure that I'm checking, we're checking in with each other each time we meet. Well, what do we feel we're missing? Is there anything we feel we need that we haven't got to help us really investigate this paper? Okay.
So I think high level perspectives just really you're going to be helpful to.
Yes.
Our benefit, I think, is from that little bit distance, so being able to see those things and connect from that far off is going to be, and then we can probably go into the bits we want to in a bit more detail when we start making those connections.
Yeah, and we might need to put some things in induction as well, potentially, because it's still quite early days. So I think, just keeping on brief, I think.
One of the benefits I can see of having people who are experienced in audit membership, those is obviously CITFA do run a lot of Joint Audit Committee training days. And I think previous independent members hadn't been too keen to go on those. I would hope, we can entice you to go on those because they are really helpful kind of updates about the sector, but you're hearing about the sector, but not from us, which obviously gives you that independence and, that outside view. I mean, I would encourage, if it can be supported by the force, for, the idea of the visits and the going out and seeing for yourself. I think for me that should be part of your work every year, if I'm honest. I think, that kind of just going out and seeing what's out there and educating yourself is really, really welcome if you can afford the time to do it. And extending, obviously come and see the OPCC as well, because it is a joint audit committee of us and for us. So I think it would be really welcome to understand what we do. And, the violence reduction partnership, by all means, go out with a navigator, go on a step together route, see what they do. So I think that the invitation is open.
Not at all. So it's probably worth saying something around our more general engagement with communities. So clearly that's something that PCC and his office have been doing significantly over the past few years, but I think it's something that we absolutely want to reinvigorate and take back to perhaps a place where it once was as well, because we've recognised as an office that perhaps through the pandemic and the working from home side of things that we've walked perhaps not entirely with our eyes open into not being in the place that we once were. We haven't quite got that level of engagement with each locality that we would wish to have. And so that is something that we're absolutely looking to get back to where we once were. So we've got now a named SMT member and member of my team, policy officer, dedicated to each geographical area, and we will be building up much stronger relationships and getting out physically to meetings, and that is something that is happening through the police and crime plan consultation as well. We are being much more visible and proactive, and our intention is that those are relationships that add real value. So I guess on the young people side, it's probably worth saying we'll continue with the Youth Commission and the Youth Assembly. People may, I don't know if it's kind of reached your awareness, but we've launched a My Tomorrow campaign through the Youth Assembly and the Violence Reduction Partnership. And that is something that is about creating a counter narrative to, I guess, the more negative side of things that kind of we hear about young people and that we talk about when we're addressing knife crime, but actually having that positive side of things as well. So both of those two things will continue. And we'll be looking to make sure that Simon's engagement and obviously Sim's as well are very much aligned to the priorities within the police and crime plan. Obviously, they emerge, and that we're really making the most of the time that Simon has and Sim have, because there is only so much time in the day, and actually how can we really maximise the impact of that? The ethics committee, or it's not quite called the ethics committee, they're going through a review at the moment. So it's an as yet unrenamed committee, but they will continue to be in operation. So they particularly focus on kind of the police data science, as it's put here in the paper, and that very technical side of ethics, and cover issues such as AI and facial recognition, so on and so forth. So they will continue to be in existence with, as I say, a review of exactly how they operate, very much with an intention of enhancing the support of OPCC in this role. And as the paper says, there's the potential for that to be used not just on local matters, but also to consider things on a national level. Well, there's some scalability there. And then finally, we hold our various scrutiny panels where we engage members of the public to join with members of our office and members of the police in scrutinising randomly selected video footage of use of force to consider how well they have followed the recommended practice and guidance. And we will absolutely be continuing those, and we'll be looking to expand both the numbers and breadth of people that are engaged in that. So we started to engage more younger people in those, and we want to continue to grow that, but equally to be expanding the range of police powers that are looked at in this session. So I think that covers kind of, hopefully gives you a sense of the breadth of everything that we're doing there, and hopefully gives you a sense of how it strengthens Simon's role. But yeah, any other questions?
Do we have questions? I think it's a helpful paper, and I think we'll see what comes forward and what develops as it continues through the next year. So no particular questions from you.
I've got one. There's a few mentions through here of data. Different sources used for different oversight and management. And whenever I see that, my first question is, how good is the quality of the data that you're basing all of these on? I appreciate it's a very newbie open question. I suppose another way to look at it is, are there any areas where you think the data, you're not quite so clear about what the quality of it is, and is there anything that you're doing around that? So just a little bit about your thoughts on data quality coming into this would be appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, data quality is definitely something that we give great concern to. I think that there's been a lot of work in the force. I mean, I'm sure Scott could speak more eloquently on it, but to ensure that that data quality is there. We clearly don't just consider the police data. We absolutely, Crime Survey of England and Wales will consider that. We clearly have to recognise the inability to look at that in a statistically significant way in terms of a local perspective. But I don't know if Jane or Scott want to say anything about that, because I know that you've both got.
There's two things for me. So first one is the OPCC in the past have produced their own performance data. So if you think about crime types, particularly registered crime data, and this paper references the Monday morning meeting as the chief himself, PCC, team that was in PCC's office, deputy PCC now. And in the past, I've looked at presentations and thought, well, that's the sort of same data, but it's cut a different way. And that's not helpful. Now, the reason for that is in the past, Forces had a closed door to its performance data. So I, for the last year and a half, now chair a monthly performance day, which takes a full day. But I have an open invite to Jonathan to come to the meeting, the PCC's chief exec. And my view from the Forces perspective is the OPCC can have all of that data because it's the same data, and our data is judged by National Crime Recording Standards, so I can say that it is as accurate as it could be and show the measurements. That's the first thing. The second thing, just to follow up on, is the slightly unrelated, but I'll say it also got the microphone, is the data ethics committee as referred to here was called a data ethics board, and it got itself into a position where it thought its job was to decide whether we could or could not do things with our data, which is why we're reviewing it, because we're going to review it. It'll still be a joint board, but to be clear, the force will only go when it's got itself into a position that it realises it's there to advise us. So it got itself into a position where it said, we're not really sure you should be using this predictive data in this way, but we'll note your opinion. We still might do it. So that's the reason for that. It's a really important point that we want that expertise and that advice from lots of academics in different fields. It's not a permission-seeking board, which is a sort of technical point. But the data was fair, and that's part of the reason why, as we were saying over lunch, that we've been consulted between the two offices. It's the PCC's plan. It's not a plan. Because we want to be able to give access to all of our data, because it's really important that it tells the same tale and allows the PCC to ask us a question and say that doesn't look very good. What are you doing about it?
Thank you. I mean, I think you said it was a technical point, but the difference between an advisory committee and a decision-making board is absolutely fundamental. So it's really important that it's clear. Thank you for that. So, I mean, the one question for me, I suppose, would be how are you going to tell whether this has improved things?
I would hope that it's through seeing an increased level of engagement would probably be the measure.
Yeah.
So we would want to see, we've got the opportunity for the asking of questions to the AGB. We have, we will be having a whole variety of activities. If we're actually getting that engagement, I think that would tell us whether we're being successful then.
Yeah, and I think one of the other key things that we've actually opened it up to, members of the community come open up and come speak to the PCC about issues they care about. But one of the key things in this is that rather than the old system where it was an agenda, just 10 different items, and not really having that quality time to really analyse and analytically go into detail about particular topics, it's limited to 3 items now, and there will be time where the PCC's team will sit together and really kind of break down those papers, really have time to scrutinise those papers before we go and meet with the chief and his team to ask questions about holding the chief to account on those areas. So we've got themes that we want to focus on. Some of those things we've taken out, we're going to focus more on the Monday meetings. Some of the ones we're keeping the public, but also the advisory committee will help assist us as being that sounding board to when we're going to go in and speak to the chief about holding to account.
Without saying as well that we've changed a little bit about what we're asking for in those papers as well. So we were conscious that sometimes there was a little bit of, when somebody answers a question in the exam, they just tell you everything they know, because we weren't being clear enough about exactly what we wanted to find out about. So we had very long papers that weren't particularly focused. So we've been really clear, and the PCC's been really clear that he expects now the paper to say what, so what, now what, and to focus on actually what does the force need the PCC to do? What does the force recognise it needs to do for itself? You know, are we exploring what that action plan might look like out at the end, so that we're much more focused on having that type of debate rather than in discussing the principles or the difficulties or those other things. So I think it has been reframed in a number of ways.
And I guess the other bit in terms of how we'll know we've been successful, you know, and I'll come on to the next bit, but we will be having a published set of KPIs that we keep updating and visible to the public via our website and business plan therein. So I think it will be a very, very open measure as well in that sense.
Good. Well, thank you very much for that. Do you want to move on to the
Yes, so let's
on refreshing the plan?
move on to the police and crime plan. So, obviously it's a requirement set out in the Police Reform and Social Responsibility 2011 Act. And I won't go through all the requirements that sets out, but that's there in the paper. I think it's fair to say that this time round we are aiming for a tighter plan than was previously the case. And we want it to be, I think, probably more accessible than it was previously. And we want it to be something that can be almost zoomed in and out of and used in a greater number of scenarios and settings, I think, to drive the work of police and partners and to enable engagement with communities. That's what we're doing. So it's going to be something that we're intending that it's published on our website, and the main way it's engaged in is through that rather than as a printed version. Simon has already set out his top priorities of his plan on a page, as we're calling it. So that's what we've used to go out to consult on. And as I said briefly previously, the intention is that each section has within it a number of key performance indicators that people can continue to look at as those are updated. The level that we're aiming at, I guess, is probably for each of those priorities. So each of those boxes, as you're looking at there, Chair, in the appendix, each of those will have a double page spread. So that's kind of the level of detail that we'll be able to go into. And the intention is that there will be further sub-strategies and documents, so action plans and quality statements, so on and so forth, and the like, that can then be people that there are links to, people can click on and go and see further detail if they wish. But the kind of the front end document should be limited to, I think it's about 32 pages is kind of where we're headed for at the moment. I think it was about 80 last time. So that's where we're headed. As you can imagine, it's a whole organisation effort, the writing of the plan, so the whole organisation is engaged in that. We've got a project board and project management methodology driving that forward, and Jonathan's the project sponsor essentially, is chief executive and chairs that board, and I and a variety of people report into that, and that's how we're managing that. And obviously we meet regularly with Wilson and PCC to ensure that they are fully up to date there, and we've got a process with the force as well to ensure that getting their input. Figure 1 on page 2, knows what your numbering will be in the overall pack, kind of sets out kind of the timeline there of how we're undertaking that. So we've already undertaken a needs assessment, and as I say, Simon set down his initial priorities and principles. We're currently in the consultation phase. So that was launched in July, and at Mellor, and we have since been at a wide variety of community events, engaging with people. We've had our survey online. So our survey is kind of our primary way of enabling people to give us their thoughts, and we're using a variety of ways of getting them to do so. So that includes going to these events, and we've got, we take our tablets out, what you've got there, and getting people to fill on those, or there's QR codes people can scan and do it on their phones. We're going to various meetings, and again, looking to collect that through the survey, because the survey enables us to collect the demographic data, which would otherwise be tricky to collect. Really. So that enables us, or it's enabling us to see where we're necessarily perfectly, but within 1 or 2% of where we would want to be based on our knowledge of the community already. And that is enabling us to target further activity, be that through social media paid advertising to target particular communities. We'll be starting to use community researchers shortly to fill in gaps in certain communities. And then, so other things we're doing, we've got a number of summits or big events. So there's certain groups that we know we want to engage with. So faith groups. So we've got a faith commission event coming up. So these are across end of September to kind of mid-October. We've got fairness and belonging, which is around something around the Black community. We've got our business summit, and we've got an event with universities, and then we've also got and beyond that, we also recognise that there are lots of people, particular more niche lived experience groups, that it probably doesn't work particularly with us heading up, let's have a big conference or what have you to find out what you think about, but rather we're looking to use our existing relationships with provider delivery organisations who have themselves got those, people with lived experience that they engage and capacity build, and they are able to engage on our behalf with those people to get that more nuanced feedback. We're also undertaking a call for evidence. So rather than the survey gives, there's some tick box things, and there's kind of free opportunities to put more detail, free text detail. But beyond that, we've got our call for evidence, which enables organisations, individuals, to submit a whole variety of things they know with, data, policy reports, so on and so forth, and that's just in whatever format they wish to so there's real opportunity for us to learn from the totality of wisdom that is out there. So we'll be that finishes in October, so we're going for the full three months of consultation, and then we'll be writing that within October and November, and then there's a formal consultation in November, December. So we're statutorily required to consult with the Chief Constable and with the Police and Crime Panel on the full police and crime plan. That's the point at which that takes place. Although, as I say, there will be a continuing conversation there, both with police, but also with the Police and Crime Panel. So we've already talked to the Police and Crime Panel once about it. We're going again in October to further talk to them about it, and then finally we'll be going in December for that formal consultation, and then launched in February. The intention, although we have got months grace there, should we require it, or we're absolutely required to have it out there. I think that's probably the main things. I mean, obviously there's a plan on the page. Encourage people to look at that. There's stuff the QR code there, so that members can in their own time scan and give feedback, which I would encourage, obviously.
Yeah, done it. It doesn't take very long.
Indeed, that's the intention. But I think that's probably all to say, unless there's any questions.
I think that's very helpful, Simon, and very clear. I think the role for the committee will be at the point at which you've got a plan and you've got a set of KPIs, and then we'll want, I think, a conversation about how you're going to measure them and when do you think it will be useful to look at how well you're doing against what you hope to do. That's when they'll next have a formal interest in the plan. But it's been very helpful, to hear directly on how you're doing it and the progress you're making. Does either of the members of the committee have any questions at this stage?
I was just wondering, this is just a general interest question, really, that you're partway through your consultation. Are you kind of checking the survey numbers? Are you encouraged by the survey numbers so far?
Yes, we are encouraged by the survey numbers. So I think we're approaching 3,000 currently. And we want to significantly improve on that. So we have got there's a number of things happening in September, October that we expect to significantly boost that. So you'll be seeing out on, if you take public transport, various adverts. You will, yeah, okay. You should. I think it's about the 8th or 9th or somewhere around there, isn't it? That they'll be going up. So we hope that takes advantage of the opportunity of people standing around or sitting down doing nothing perhaps, or not that much, to give them an opportunity to scan that QR code and fill it in. We're exploring, I think, putting something in the Metro paper as well. We expect our young people numbers to be significantly going up because we've been awaiting kids going back to school for then the youth commissioners and youth assembly members to be engaging with their peers within those settings. So we're hopeful that we will significantly add. But we're glad that we think they're at a good point already, but we're absolutely focused on bringing those and the social media stuff as well. We're putting more money into that targeted side, as I said, which will also just increase our chances.
We are tracking it, and we've got 2 trackers. One is basically saying, what are the answers and how many we have. We've had 2,755.
There we go.
The last time I refreshed it. But we're comparing against the latest census data in each of our local authority regions. So we know that we're only at 8% in terms of our responses coming from Sandwell, and we expect 12%. So Sandwell will become somewhere that we need to go and take community researchers because we're not getting any reach at the moment. What we didn't want to do is get to the end of the process and say, it wasn't representative of so-and-so without making attempts to do that. And as Simon says, at the moment, we would expect to get 11% of our responses from under 18 to only at 2%. So we're hoping during September that will quickly shoot up. If it doesn't, we'll have to take extra steps to go out and find other means to make sure that's representative. But we are tracking, against all of the things that we can reasonably collect in terms of demographic data to make sure that we are receiving responses from a wide range across the board. What's encouraging is that the things that people care about in their top 10 have been very consistent since the first responses came in. And haven't really shifted that much. And the top 5 are still the top 5, I think. They haven't shifted.
Yeah.
But you should see more. And also, we are sending out posters, good old-fashioned posters, to as many GP surgeries, dentists that we can think of. So basically, anywhere that somebody might be sat for 5 minutes, bored, thinking, what can I do? We're hoping that they might choose to tell us what they think about the piece of platform.
One of my questions has been answered through the conversation, so that's great. It's half been answered through this, but when it comes back, it'd be interesting for your reflections about what came out from this with the things that you weren't expecting, to where it was maybe slightly not aligned to what you thought was going to be coming through, where it's maybe a slight tension to existing plans. That's not a question for now, but it'd be interesting on the reflections about when it comes back.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of that side of things is likely to be in the free text side, which we have. That's not we haven't evaluated that yet. We're keeping an eye on the tick box stuff if that comes through nicely on a dashboard. But so there's a separate process to analysing the free text stuff, which we'll do at the end.
But it's also being done using the same data product, so that although it's a qualitative assessment, we're applying as much rigour to that as we would with a quantitative. I mean, in terms of, are we getting back what we thought? So far, 92% of people agree with the priorities and principles. So only 8% have said they don't agree. So we think that's a very good indicator that we're on the money, but, hopefully that'll stay the case.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Okay, well, thanks very much, Simon. Thank you very much for coming along as well. That's been really helpful, and thanks for coming earlier and saying hello to folk. And we'll be building a new and productive relationship. as we all mature in our new forms. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
You guys along that side want to shuffle slightly, so you've got your. Thank you.
Well, Melissa, do you want to just come on then? Say.
Have you got nameplates there for everybody, Russell? So people pick up their nameplates as they come as well, just for the benefit of. For the benefit of our new members who, who've not met you before, so they'll know who you do. Thank you. Right, good, so that brings us to item 7, risk management update, both course and OPCC. Jane, do you want to, who's going to, should we start with?
Probably best to start with them.
Okay, start with this. Okay, do you want to introduce yourself to our new members, so that they know who you are? And,
Good afternoon, I'm Melissa Horton. I'm a Senior Risk and Assurance Manager for Corporate Development under the Deputy Portfolio for West Midlands Police. So the purpose of the report, which I really hope you have a copy of,
yes, and have read and read questions.
which is to review the oversight of the risk registers, and the progress and development of the organisational risk processes for the force. Since the last committee meeting, strategy, delivery and assurance has split into 2 distinct departments. The risk and assurance team falls under the corporate development arm of that split now. As a consequence of that restructure, the risk and assurance team did suffer some resourcing loss during that time. However, I'm pleased to say that one of the appointments has been successful and started yesterday in the assurance manager role. The recruitment activity for the risk and assurance manager was, however, unsuccessful on the first attempt, and is back out for recruitment campaign at the moment. That's due to close within the next week or 2, but already is proving to be more successful than the last one. So I'm hopeful that by the next committee, I'll have some positive news with regard to that role. Attendance at the SLTs has continued, and we are applying the risk appetite statements to the risk register as we move forward, embedding that understanding to the SLTs and the senior leaders. As a consequence of the recent promotion process within force, we have suffered some loss of SPOCs that we had established within.
Can you, rather than the acronyms, a SPOC may not mean anything.
Single point of contact, so an SME, if you like, specialising in risk management within the portfolios. We have lost some of those due to the recent promotion process. So we're in current process of identifying new individuals for that, of which we will be setting out training sessions and also explaining to them the expectations of the roles and the responsibilities that accompany that, and to put those people back into the position to just help that whole risk process across the organisation. We also have attendance at governance boards, meeting with the force executive team to cite them on their portfolios and the activities taking place, and just to drive forward those treatment and mitigations against the risks that are recorded. The risk management processes within West Midlands Police have been on a journey in the last 18 months, hopefully for progression. As a consequence of that and an internal audit that was conducted by the OPCC, we have performed a maturity exercise to map against that journey that has been taken. That was reported to the DCC this morning at the Risk and Organisational Learning Board. We have progressed, perhaps not as much as the ambition would have liked, but we have moved from a risk-aware position to a defined position. Further update will be provided at the next JAC meeting in relation to recommendations that have been raised around that. But however, it was a positive experience, and we will be repeating that risk maturity exercise on an annual basis until we have reached a position that we are satisfied with. In terms of project risks, there are none to report this quarter, but we are anticipating that there are 3 projects due for closure over the next quarter, which will be reviewed, and any residual risks or any risks which will transfer into business as usual will transfer onto the risk register for consideration. The 3 projects that we are anticipating for closure are a single online home, a CMPG speed enforcement project, and an in-house driver education project. In terms of new corporate risks and changes within those, there's none to report this quarter. And in terms of corporate risk updates, there's one in relation to the financial management risk, which was previously recorded on the corporate risk register. This is in relation to the police pay award, which has been announced at 4.75%. That does cause potential impact to the budget, which relates directly to this risk. The narrative around that has also been given around the potential for the police staff pay rise and the implications of what that would mean. If we move on then to the closed corporate risks, there's 3 that have been recommended for closure that were ratified this morning by the DCC. One of those was the officer and staff right to work checks. All of those have now been completed and no further issues have been identified. There are monitoring processes and improvements in current process to ensure that that does not reoccur and that mitigation is sufficient to move us forward on that without going back into that risk. The second one is the Plato embedded learning. That was also closed this morning. There were a number of parts to that risk which was on the risk register for a number of time, for some time. As a consequence of that, a new issue has been raised from that and recorded on the risk register. So we have closed this one in its entirety, but raised a new one in relation to JOPS 3, which is a training package for officers, to allow us just to make sure that that particular element, that residual element, if you like, is monitored and managed as it should be. And the third and final one is the PCC transition to mayoral governance. That has been reviewed and closed. All appropriate documentation and organisational learning from that has been reported and is in the process of being captured through the organisational learning department that sits under my remit. That's the end of my report.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa. In the informal session, sort of induction session that we had earlier, we have already agreed that actually for our new members, we need an offline briefing on the whole transition that's taken place with Enforce in terms of assessing, monitoring, and recording and reporting risk. So we'll definitely put that in the diary so that before the December meeting, we'll have had a fuller briefing on what the force is looking at and how they're being dealt with. But I think that's helpful. So, but there may still be questions from this afternoon. So we'll deal with those before we move on to PCC.
I've got one specific, if I may, in relation to one of the risks reported. So that's on the PCC register, and
we'll come back to the PCC. We're dealing with the force at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's just more generally understanding where it's going. I mean, I think from first opening it up, my expectation was there'd be quite a few more risks on there, but I appreciate there's a journey that's going through with it. But we'll look forward to having that conversation.
Of course.
I suspect the answer to that is probably that within the force there are lots of things that are recorded on local risk registers rather than the force risk registers. So if you think about, we've got 7 local policing areas, one of them is Birmingham, which is bigger than half of the police forces in the country. So if you think in that context, it's quite right that some of those risks sit at a local level rather than everything sit on the force. So we only report in here and to the OPCC on the things that are on the force risk register. We've got lots of other risks that sit on our local risk registers, which is something you might expect to see, but they sit better locally. So I'll give you for instance, we had a risk around gymnasiums, whether or not everybody was using them was trained. Now, yes, they sit across the whole force, but they're actually owned by our corporate asset management team that works for Peter, and that's on their departmental risk register rather than on the ones that's seen by me.
If I could just put some assurance around that as well, obviously the deputy is absolutely accurate in what he's saying, but those departmental or local risk registers do sit under my remit in a centralised location, so they are not managed independently by other people. They all come in centrally. We have a process and procedure that allows us to review those, triage them as necessary, and escalate and de-escalate up and downstream within that process. So just to add some assurance from your perspective that they are now reviewed, monitored, progressed, managed centrally, and we move them up and down as need be according to the matrix and scores that are applied consistently now across that and within our risk appetite statement. So we do have hundreds of risks on the overall risk register, but not presented at a corporate level for oversight here.
Chair, if I may just add to that in terms of a bit further reality, the deputy mentioned kind of elements of kind of my portfolio. So on a monthly basis, we review the risks associated with commercial services and people services, but we have a colleague from corporate development comes in and sits in the meeting and actually really helpfully provides that bit of independent challenge that, you know, are you right to think about escalating it, or actually should you be escalating it, and so on and so forth. So I think that kind of really joined up approach between what happens with risk management kind of within portfolios and then the corporate risk kind of force level risk register is really helpful, and definitely from my perspective has significantly progressed in the couple of years that I've been here at the force compared to what we inherited.
I think you know what we need to assess is having moved, and we've discussed this both informally and formally already, having moved to a situation where we've got a wholly independent audit committee and we've got members sitting on it who aren't seeing anything that's happening anywhere else. We do need to make sure that we've got the right balance in what we see, and that we've got assurance that the things we're not seeing are things we ought to see. If you see, if everybody follows that. So I think there's going to be a process to go through to ensure that we're all comfortable with that we've got the right balance. But we can, you know, we'll have a broader discussion on that offline, so that we're clear that when we are online, we're seeing the right things. And that example of the gymnasium is because actually that did appear on a paper that came to us probably 6 months ago, and we all did go, that's not really something that is, you know, of a nature that we need to be having it reported to us. So it's getting the balance right.
I'm sort of thinking out loud, but we need to make sure, the force needs to make sure that in doing so, we're not briefing this committee on things that we've not briefed the
yes.
Because we only report in force risks to the OPCC in a process that we've agreed, and I think it would be wholly inappropriate to report in here things that we've not raised with the OPCC. So I understand the question, but it just needs a bit of thinking about.
Yeah. The whole balance needs to be right. Yeah. Okay.
Can I just add a comment? So I think it's probably about the content in the paper that we're seeing, actually, because I think as a new member, and it may just be that I'm asking a daft question, is that I couldn't get a handle on the risks. It's not because you don't have a handle on them, it's just because it was the visibility of it, I think, from the paper, and the fact that I haven't sat on this committee before. Would also like to say that I think that the risk maturity approach is a really, really good approach. And I think that I've been in organisations that have gone through that periodically for 3 to 5 years actually to take them on that journey, and I think it's a really successful way to actually move risk management in the right way. Actually, with taking people with you and being able to kind of pass that information on and increasing the quality of risk management information. So I think that's a really good approach.
Thanks. So Jane, on the OPCC side, do you want to take us through anything?
Not really. I mean, unfortunately for members, we did a really sort of quite an exhaustive update last time.
Yeah.
Because we hadn't revisited the risk register whilst we were going through the governance transfer, because at that time we reported a separate risk register to Joint Audit Committee in a closed session, because with the very grateful support of the chair, it was rather a delicate matter what went into the public domain, and we wanted Audit Committee to have relevant oversight without us getting into a position whereby, sure you can imagine, officer said in Audit Committee there is a risk that the mayor taking over would, we had to recognise all sorts of risks to operation of OPCC and force, and be open and transparent, but without setting hairs running. So we had a good chance to have a look through, and I think there's no further changes from what we had proposed last time. I think you have had a copy of our risk register, which is a more traditional, we are an office-only operation. We do have the VRP, but we certainly don't have the scale and distributed nature of risk that the force does. And so our corporate risk register is probably appropriately sized for us, really. But did you have a question there?
Yeah, it was number 10, the business continuity one, which, if I understand the narrative here, unmitigated, it's the highest risk that it could be, for very high impact, very high likelihood. With the mitigations, that takes it down to the 16. And I particularly like talking about these in numbers because it's risks that fall within a variety of points within this. That still keeps it, with the way the mitigation is now, high impact and a likelihood. And I just wonder what's the thought process that assesses it there, and is that down to a place that you're comfortable?
I think the reason for marking it as we did is based on sort of industry risk advice now, that the potential for, in particular, an outside agent creating a loss of service in IT, for example. Most people in the risk sector now seem to say not only will it happen at some point, but it will be catastrophic when it does. That's the information that we get from most risk leaders. So we're responding to that and saying we're no different to any other organisation. However, how do we mitigate that down? Because we're in an organisation that has to be quite responsive and understand risk, we work within the environment with the force of understanding gold, commands, and we have a number of our senior leaders trained in that gold command training. We do have a lot of ability to respond and to recover from a difficult situation. We do annual critical incident training. We had one this year, and we invited members of OPCCs from the region actually to come and attend and sort of as observers, and they were really interested in that actually. But we were basically running through what would happen if the chief executive wasn't available, and we suddenly had an incident which was a critical incident for the force, but became a critical incident for us at the same time, which could happen. I won't go into the details. It was an interesting sort of, what do we do? And we ran through a number of scenarios as a team, and we worked our way through it. So we're alive to the risk. We understand what those risks might be and where they might come from, and we have regular methods of checking in that we have some way of recovering activity back to a base level as soon as we can. So therefore, that's why it's come down to a 16, because we think we're relatively well able to deal with it. We have robust IT. These laptops don't just have Wi-Fi, they all have independent SIM cards. So even if all of the Wi-Fi goes down, we can still contact one another, and we have means to do so. So we have some resilience, I guess, is why we've come down to 16. But because we'd have to walk it through in endless detail if we were just to explain every angle.
It sounds like it's actually better managed than I read it to be here, because I don't think the risk is the thing happens.
Yeah.
The risk is that you can't do what you want to, or what you need to, because of the thing that's happened. So if you're more comfortable with where that is, then that's reassuring.
I think it is still an amber, because unfortunately it's pretty likely to happen at some point. We wouldn't be the first, well, I'm not
Well,
sure
I mean,
police
we've
stories
had
numbers,
NHS examples
Yeah.
at the extreme levels already twice this year.
Yeah.
It's always a case of, not if, but when.
Yeah.
To prepare.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Thanks very much then for those questions. And clearly, as we've already discussed informally, the OPCC's register will have to be amended clearly once there's a new policing plan. It may be that there'll be new elements that come into that. So thanks very much to Melissa and Jane for that. And if you need to get off, Melissa, we understand, but we are, as you can see, we're short. We're not such a big room today, so people are coming in as we're ready for them to present. But by all means, stay if you're interested and want to. So that brings us to item 8. Which is an update on the inspectorate activity. So we've got Fiona here to present on that, and we've got your title but not your rank there. So you might just want to formally introduce yourself, Fiona.
Good afternoon. So Fiona Fletcher. I'm a temporary chief inspector here in West Midlands Police, and my current role is force liaison officer for HMIC of the force. So I'll just take you through the HMIC update for this month. A relatively short one. There hasn't been too much to report on in terms of for the purpose of Jack. But just to bring you up to speed, you'll no doubt be aware as a force in 2023 we had our appeal inspection. We received 4 causes of concern throughout. As a result of that inspection, as a result, we placed it to what's called Engage, which is enhanced monitoring by HMIC. And since that point, I've been working furiously hard to address the recommendations that were made and the causes of concern. HMIC came back into force in May, June this year to revisit us and have a look at our progress against, in particular, 3 of the causes of concern, which were mainly within the vulnerability arena in our public protection. So that was in relation to our OPCC, which is our online child sexual exploitation, our SOMS, which is sex offender managers, and our MARAC, which is our multi-agency assessments for victims of high-risk domestic abuse. So in those 3 areas, they came back in to have a look at our progress. And really pleasingly, as a result of that activity, they closed 3 of our causes of concern, highlighting sustained improvements in our performance in all 3 of those areas. It's really positive. So that leaves us with 1 remaining cause of concern, which is for investigations. By no means a small feat, but we are working hard. And this week, the inspectorate are conducting a remote inspection. It's called a case file review, where they sample 100 of our cases from a period in time which is the entirety of April and May this year. They sample 100 of our cases and go through them, mapping out the victim's journey from start to end. And that's the process that they're doing this week as part of our revisit under investigations. And then next week, we'll have an inspection team physically in force that will be conducting their fieldwork activity, going out to the various LPAs, 7 commands within the force, to actually meet officers, speak to them, have a look at what their workloads look like, and really try and understand what's the progress that the force has made in relation to that. We'll also have an opportunity to provide a strategic briefing to the team in order to kind of outlay the progress that we've made. And as a result of that sort of almost triangulation of activity, so we've got the remote activity, we've got the field work that they do, we would then anticipate a further update from HMIC as to what our progress has been against that cause of concern. So in addition to that, so since the last chat, there's been no reports that are published. Obviously, as a force, we will either have our own internal inspections, for which reports will be published, or HMIC may conduct inspections nationally on thematic inspections, which we may not be part of as a force. However, we would be subject to the reports and the recommendations that are made. And if that was the case, then I would report that in here for you so that you can see, be able to keep a kind of a running idea of the recommendations that we've been placed under. There haven't been any reports since the last Jack, so there aren't any to report there. We continue to hold a number of recommendations generally, and these are governed through the Deputy Chief Constable's HMIC Oversight Board. These have reduced considerably, certainly since I've been in the post, and this new process has kind of worked over the last 12 months. And since the last JAP, we've closed a further 47 recommendations, and are now, from the research that I've done, we've got the lowest amount of recommendations open compared to any other metropolitan boroughs. So I think we're in a much better and more positive place than we were before.
I don't know whether Scott might want to comment on that, because I know when you arrived, one of your key priorities was you've got too many recommendations that were not historic in the sense that they weren't important anymore, but they just weren't being dealt with in what you felt was a sufficiently robust and quick enough fashion. So, but you have made significant progress, so it might be.
Yeah, I think kind of two observations, but I think the culture of the force developed into HMIC was an organ, so His Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, it's HMIC FRS now, just to make it snappier. The force developed into a place where they were an inspectorate body that turned up, and we all, a bit like Ofsted, we all panicked 24 hours before they turned up. And when I arrived here, one of the things that I thought was important was that senior leaders, so everybody of kind of chief inspector and above, police staff equivalents, know what the curriculum is and know what the question set is. So if I said to people, what's question 7.1.1 of an 11 question set, question 7.1 is about how do you manage outstanding offenders. The reason I always ask one is because it's the hardest one, because an offender can be somebody that's wanted for prolific shoplifting over here versus somebody that's overseas wanted for homicide and everything in between. And so we've introduced a monthly meeting where we measure two things. The first one is outstanding causes of concern, which is the most serious, areas for improvement and recommendations, but also carve up the question set divided between all of the chief officers. So Pete owns a question set and a series of outstanding recommendations, etc. And so do each of the assistant chief constables. And then supported by Fiona and the team in corporate development, it gives them the opportunity. So we have individual boards chaired by the chief officers in 1 week where they look at, well, what is our evidence to present back to HMIC to close off that recommendation, to close off that cause of concern? And then secondly, if they walked in tomorrow, what would be our evidence that we would present to say, this is how we manage offenders, this is how we spend our money wisely, this is how we develop our staff, this is how we engage with communities. And then at the end of that week, then there's a board that I chair where all of that is reported into me. And as the chair says, when I first arrived here, our oldest outstanding recommendation was from 2014. Now, the reason it hadn't been written off was because it was about the provision of secure beds for young people that we remanded to custody. Well, we haven't got any shovels and bricks and build. We can't build any. The force wasn't brave enough to write back and say, very, very interesting, we can't do anything about it. So we are nearly at the case, but not yet there, where we've got no overdue recommendations. And my determination is that by the end of this calendar year, every AFI cause of concern that the force have got is within date. And then the second cultural point is, I think the force has got itself into a position where when a report lands, we get a draft copy of it. And it would then put a team together to attack it. Tell that it's not right, this bit, we don't agree, and so on. It doesn't really matter whether we agree, because that's what they found and that's what they'll publish. So now the only thing we comment on is factual accuracy, which is what we should have been doing all along. So we say, you've said it was a Tuesday, actually it was a Wednesday, or you've said that we had this many sergeants, we've got that many. Because we need to get into a position where we view them as free consultancy. Sometimes I'm not certain you pay for the consultancy anyway, but to change that mindset, say it doesn't matter whether we agree, that's what they found, to get us into a different position, which is why we're really pleased with the fact that we've got rid of 3 of those causes of concern. But I do need to be clear to you as an audit committee, this current one that's been re-inspected is a big culp. The force had got itself into a position where it wasn't really investigating volume crime over about 10 years. It was hiding behind austerity and all feeling a bit sorry for ourselves and filing things automatically. And so it's a significant shift of the culture of the organisation to say it's really important to investigate things. That inspection, which is running, as Fiona says, this week and next week, it will be close. So we just don't know.
I think taking on from that is we will be subject to another peer inspection. They run every sort of 2 to 3 years. So part of working towards the next one is working out what are our gaps in term ready for next time, so we can start addressing that through the question set, so we know what does good look like, what do we look like, and where do we need to get to in between. So we're in a much better place ahead and ready for next time. So that, as I said, there's been no inspection activity since the last JAC. We've got the remote one this week, and they're in force next week. And currently there aren't any other forecasted inspection activity that we can kind of put down on paper in a minute. So changes for the next JAC, then obviously I'll include that on the papers.
I think, Faye, you had a question around some of this, which I think would be useful in light of what Scott said the same.
Yeah, and this is really, really helpful. I am the newbie and I'm new to policing, so so forgive me on that. I think it's been a really, really helpful presentation and your input as well, Scott. And I think my question is really around, this is really good that you're kind of using this as free consultancy and free assurance, actually, and that you're managing to take down, all of those recommendations and satisfy them. But I guess I'm linking this with item 12, which is actually the external auditors report. So how do we make sure that these improvements stick, that they're long-lasting, and that we're not just going, okay, we've got a problem, let's fix it, and then you move on to the next problem. Sometimes, you mentioned culture a number of times, you move on to the next thing. Sometimes then there's a little bit of slippage. So how do you keep it?
I think that's probably for me to answer. Just pick the words carefully. Firstly, it comes from the top of the organisation. So we need to continue to deliver the culture that the only independent advocates acting on behalf of the public across the whole of the country are the HMIs, because they're independently warranted by the King. So PCCs are there to hold chiefs to account. Independent advocates that act on behalf of the whole of the country are the HMIs. We need to view them as that. And I think the force previously had got itself into a position where it viewed them as a pain or something difficult. So that's the kind of first bit. The second bit then is what I talked about a little bit before when talking about the policing crime plan is investing properly in a performance ratio for the force. So our performance day now runs, it is a day. So 18 months ago, it was 3 hours. It's a full day now. And you'd be very welcome to come and sit in the DEPS performance day whenever you want to come and observe it. It is 2 parts to it. So the first part is proper gritty performance. Why does it take us so long to do that? Why is architecture rate that? And then the second part of the day is an assurance framework. We've got an assurance calendar, which allows, it's chaired by me, but it's to make sure that every 6 months we do a review of all of outstanding health and safety actions. Our fleet usage or building usage or outstanding critical training. So we've got an assurance calendar to make sure that we are leading the whole of the force in its totality. And then the final point is the point I was making before, which is don't view our appeal inspection as, if we come out of cause of concern, we won't be sighing with relief and saying, that's all fine now, they're 2.5 years away. We will spend the next 2 years preparing for it. And the final way to do that is to be a bit more open. So as I said earlier, I have an open invite for the OPCC Chief Exec to come to Performance Day, but also Fiona is our Force Liaison Officer. From the HMIC side, it's called something different, it's the Force Liaison Lead. It's their FLL. We invite him as well to every single one of our Performance Days so that we can bring them closer to us. And I think what that in its totality means that you don't just write the cause of concern. And actually, if you look at the 3 causes of concern, they're very snappily titled Oxet, Salt and Marrow, which I was very grateful for Fiona for defining for you. One of the reasons why they became causes of concern is because, I will not make excuses at all, but when they landed, the chief had been here about 6 months and I'd been here about 3 months. The issue was, whilst we were restructuring the force, we had backlogs in some of those areas and we didn't know about it. That's the reason they became causes of concern. Not because they didn't believe we could fix them in short time. It was actually, you don't know about it. And it felt a bit cool because it's a big place, this, we've not been here very long. But it was actually, it doesn't know about you whether the chief and the deputy do. What the point they're making is your performance regimes is such that this is a bit wobbly and it hasn't been escalated. And hopefully, it's not perfect, is it? But hopefully we're in a position now where those things would come and raise to us. But there's no escaping. It's a big old organisation. Policing is complex, and there are things that somebody think, oh, crikey, I thought that looked better. I'll have to get into it. But I think it's a really fair question. Hopefully, decisions are sustainable, which is why it took 6 months to write the first 3 off, and this one's being re-inspected now because HMI themselves want to make sure that the changes that were made are sustained and embedded and long-lasting.
I'll just add something around the building the link between the work of the external auditors and statutory accounts and HMIC. We are a very highly regulated place, and you would want it to be, right? That's not a bad thing. But for example, what the auditors ask of us is that our annual governance statement reflects the work that we're doing, what the workforce are doing at HMIC, and reflects the OPCC's view of that. So HMIC don't inspect the OPCC. The inspection is all about operational policing, but they do inspect some aspects which they cross over, don't they? So, for example, they one of the questions is about medium-term financial sustainability, effectively. But if you think about it, the force cannot act alone in resolving that because we are the funding body. So it doesn't make complete sense that HMIC ignores the role of the PCC. So it is complicated, it's nuanced, and we have to respond in that way. But when we were putting together our annual governance statement, because the accounts sign-off came sometime after the end of the year, I think it's fair to say, Lauren, we disagreed with our external audit colleagues that we needed to make a comment in the AGS about the HMIC findings, because it was all of our views, the OPCC and the force independently, that actually we didn't think that it was a value for money issue in terms of the publication of the accounts, and therefore we did not want to reference it that way in the annual governance statement. So we've agreed to disagree, and we signed and moved on. But that's the sort of Venn diagram of how that comes into the work around the statutory accounts and the annual governance statement.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. Hopefully this year is ongoing, isn't it? Hopefully this will be resolved.
3 out of 4 down.
Excellent.
Just one incredibly hard one to go.
Yes.
But if we do get out by the end of this calendar year, that'll be the fastest any police force has ever against status.
A detailed question about what cause for concern is. It sounds quite benign, but I'm guessing it's not from everything that's been going on here. Is it a case of if your performance is below an acceptable level, that would trigger that? But equally, if you don't know where your performance is that something that would trigger that cause for concern? Has it
Yeah,
come
well,
about?
there's sort of scales within HMIC. So you've got areas for improvement, and then you've got recommendation, you've got cause of concern. So it's almost like an escalation process in that. And then within that as well, they have their own levels in terms of how you can sign them off. So level 1, we would very rarely get one, but we could close the source. Level 2 could be signed off by force. Level 3 would require some sort of independent scrutiny from HMIC to kind of confirm that the force is right. And level 4 would require force to come in and re-inspect in order to be able to sign that. So your causes of concern would be sort of at that level and it completely escapes me what the definition is for a cause of concern off the top of my head. But
I think the important bit is it's usually where there's risk to the public. That's sort of what we're getting to. The important bit is, very right to say, so if it's level 2, so if it's a recommendation, so first recommendations we can ignore because it's a recommendation, so we don't have to do it. We're bound to do that. An area for improvement is where there's no risk to the public safety, but they say, actually, you might want to have a look at this. We can write those off ourselves. So the way that we do it is we give somebody all the work to do. They do all the work, they can present it through a variety of boards, and ultimately, Fiona and Melissa, who was here before, will eventually say to me, we think we've done enough here, we think we've answered it. I can then sign a letter, we write that to HMRC and say, we've done that now. If it's level 3 and it's a area for improvement, then we can still do that. And they say we might come back and have a look. We don't have to. A cause of concern we cannot write off. We have to be re-inspected. So they are outstanding. So it's then completely out of our control as well. It stands until they say enough time has passed for us to come and re-inspect you. So this one, the reason the investigation was important, because as much as I want to get us out of engaged status, equally, if they'd have said to me, we're going to come in January and inspect you, I thought, well, that's even longer to fix some of these systemic things. They are here next week. There's nothing we can do about it, but we'll, you know, the worst case scenario, if you get a cause of concern and it gets worse, you then get an accelerated cause of concern, which usually the last couple of places I've got is a very, very difficult position for PCCs and chiefs to be in that, depending on the relationship and the timing and so on. That is a difficult place. We're nowhere near that. So they'll either say not quite, or they'll say you've done enough.
Okay.
It'll be one of those two.
Thank you.
For this one.
Yeah, from a new member perspective, I remember when I joined policing,
Yes.
I found there is a glossary on the HMIC FRS web. It was just HMIC, then not FRS, and it's still there. So if you see stuff in the UR reports that relate to HMIC,
There's a methodology.
yeah, absolutely there is. Yeah, that's quite helpful. They've got quite a helpful website.
As an audit geek, that's.
Yeah, they publish all of their reports. So.
But it's far less. I mean, having had inspections in the health sector and in schools, this does feel to me as though it's much more consistent and it's much clearer where something's coming from. You've not got the potential for an individual inspector to take a view that's not consistent with what might happen next door, last week or something. It's far more standard.
We would, expect to say this.
Yeah.
No, so the amount of overdue sex offender visits that we have when we got put into engaged status, we had less than Greater Manchester Police had on the day that they came out of special measures.
Right.
So it is, and the important bit is, so you've got a chief HMI, Mr. Cook, and then you've got a series of HMIs.
Yeah.
He is not their boss because they are all independently warranted by the King.
Right.
So you can get within those teams the nuances of, it's not necessarily about the numbers. So we've got some PPOG, which is the Police Performance Oversight Group, which is where the chief and the PCC go every quarter to present our progress against them. We've got some slightly mischievous slides in it where we point out to the HMIC judgments that they've made against other forces in the same sets of circumstances. Just to remind them.
Okay.
Sometimes it's not perfect.
You see, but you've popped one of my bubbles there.
What I struggle with as well, just this independent of those bits of, being fairly new to the sector as well, is it's an inspection, not an audit. And so, there is no kind of audit question set. So how normally you prepare for an audit, the auditor sends you a list of things they want to see, questions they want to ask, you bat it backwards and forwards, you're clear on what it is. They just come and they ask what they ask and they see what they see and they report it all. And it's quite flat, so one particular instance where they just happened to speak to one sergeant who was grumpy after doing an extra long shift is reported as verbatim because it's an inspection and not an audit. And I struggle with that, really do, because I find, to then be held in the public gaze so strongly over what could be an opinion formed based on nothing is quite challenging.
If I can give you a very quick, tangible example. So one of our 3 causes of concern was MARAC, so multi-agency risk conferences for high-risk domestic abuse cases. So they said, it takes too long for you to get a case to a MARAC case conference, which I don't disagree with. And we said, what are you basing that judgment on? And the only thing that you can base that judgment on is there's a charity called Safer Lives. So they base it on Safer Lives guidance. So it's a non-statutory process because there's no basis in law for having MARAC, so we don't have that. There's no statutory guidance because the guidance comes from a charity, and we're being inspected by a mandatory independently warranted organisation as part of the statutory process that's defined in law. So James used the term earlier, some of this is nuanced, some of this is very nuanced. That's your opinion. Ours is slightly different, but it is what it is. So what do we end up doing? We end up producing data to show them that we're directly in line with that guidance now. It's not statutory because it makes them happen.
The other thing, not to put Putin completely by the way, is there's no question of cost. So they hold you to account against a platinum set of standards, which in a perfect world everybody will wish to achieve, without understanding that the force will always have competing business requirements and has to be best account of what it's got. So it's like an uncosted, if you landed from Mars and you wanted to create the best police force you've ever seen, Nobody's in that world. I was.
That's all right. I did say that. I did say that this morning. That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. I think that's been really helpful.
Yeah.
Hopefully for our new members, it's really brought them up to speed well, and that's been quite in depth. So thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Scott, for being there.
Sent through or anything else. Yeah, no, that's our place. Yeah.
And you may well find people taking up on your office and coming along to a performance.
We even put one on it.
Oh wow. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, so that brings us on to item 9, which is Lynn's report on internal audit activity.
Thank you, Chair. So you will have had a chance to read the report, and as you see, we finalised 4 audits during the last reporting period, and we've got 3 in draft. I'll talk about those in a bit more detail towards the end. In addition to the audits, we've followed up on 20 audits which have outstanding recommendations this year, and implemented or partly implemented will run about 71%, but I imagine that will increase close to the 80s by the year end. And the high and medium rated were about 69%. So there's a list of those provided at the end of the report with the progress to date on each of those. I think it's true to say there are some long outstanding recommendations that we continue to hold open, that we think it's important to hold open. At some stage, when we get to the point where they've been open for a long time, we will have that discussion with the Force Exec team lead to say, okay, do you want to accept the risk or leave it open? And we'll figure out a way that we can address it. But some of those that are open are being addressed through some ongoing projects. For example, detained property uniform, we discussed those at the last committee. And we've agreed that there'll be an extended time period by which we go back and follow up on those because of that project that's ongoing. So hopefully over the next sort of 6 months, we should see some of those starting to get closed off as the project progresses. Another big piece of work that we've got on at the moment is in relation to the National Fraud Initiative, and I'm sure that you're familiar with this. So it's an exercise run by the Cabinet Office every 2 years where we provide data from our payment system, our payroll system, our pensions system. That is data matched against other public sector organisations for potential fraud or error. And luckily for us, all of the results come back to us to investigate. And there's often several thousand of them to work our way through, so we have to prioritise those. So the work we're doing on that at the moment is to prepare the data sets for submission in the first week in October. And then we should get the matches released January, although they are aiming to issue some December this year. So from January, I'll report to the committee on the progress that we're making in terms of those investigations. You will be familiar with SIAS and also the new global code for internal audit that's been released by ILA. We are still waiting for CIPFA to produce any proposed changes to the public sector internal audit standards. We were expecting it by September. We are in September. I did check yesterday and the consultation documentation hasn't been released yet. But once it is released, obviously I'll work my way through that to see what changes are required, if any, to any of our processes. I'm not expecting any drastic changes though from what I've seen of the code. But obviously we will keep members up to date. So just coming back to the audits that we've issued, we have issued 2 substantials this period, which is quite unusual because we do focus on risk-based audits, which naturally tend to be where there's issues or things that we need additional assurance on. But I think I just wanted to highlight the 2 substantials. So we've talked about sort of changes in operational procedures, and we've talked about changes in some of the governance arrangements that the DCC has implemented since the new command team have started. Those changes were basically built on new local policing areas. So this year we put in some audits around local policing and how their governance arrangements are working. So it's really focusing on governance data and performance. And the plan for this was that we will do 2 each year to make sure that any changes, the governance remains robust across local policing. So we visited 2 LPAs this year, and we were really, really encouraged by what we found when we went out. We found really strong governance regimes. I think it's fair to say there's a lot of meetings that are held across LPAs, but the remit was clear. We didn't really see any opportunity at that time to streamline. They were all necessary meetings, but they did have clear remit reporting lines, escalation routines. I think there was a clear evidence trail of reporting, particularly around performance from that sort of operational level through to the strategic boards, including the Dutch Performance Day. So performance information is at varying levels, as you would expect for each of the boards. And also we did see a clear understanding from the senior officers around the new risk management regimes that were being operated. So that was really, really positive results for us. So that was great news, because we don't often see substantial opinions coming through. There's just one limited, I think, it is highlighted in the report in relation to environmental strategy. So I think it's fair to say that this probably and hopefully reflects a position at a point in time. There was a short-term lapse of control over the previous 12 months due to the absence of a key member of staff. This key member of staff was leading on this strategy. So while some good achievements were made in areas like the Carbon Trust and the Bronze Investors in Environment accreditation, what we did see was actually a lapse in the governance and oversight of the strategy and the deliverables within the strategy, which made it quite difficult to understand where the strategy was up to in terms of delivery. So we've had to give a limited assurance around that. The key person is back in position now, and at the end of the audit, between the position and the draft and us actually finalising the audit, I'm pleased to say that she has reinvigorated those boards that had lapsed. So we should be seeing some more scrutiny and oversight in that area, and she is in the process of developing an action tracker to monitor the actions around the core deliverables within the plan. So I'm hopeful that if we revisit that again, it'll be in a much better position. And certainly when we do the follow-up in 6 months' time, I'm hopeful that we should be able to sign the majority of recommendations off. So that's all I wanted to highlight with you from my report.
Yeah. So, anyone have any questions? Yes, yes,
Yeah. Only a couple, thank you. It's a helpful report. Section 3.4 with your draft reports, is there anything in there that's coming through that's a lower level assurance? I appreciate that it's a draft.
Yeah, I think that the opinions that we've given on those 3 will fall into the limited or minimal category. So the 3 of them are out for consultation at the moment on management actions to address the recommendations. So yeah, those 3 will be coming through in some detail in the report next time. We can have a more detailed discussion around the findings. So just in case there's any factual inaccuracies, I don't really want to go into the detail this time.
Not asking for that, I was just wondering, so they were based on risk-based auditing?
They are, yes.
You know, as you say, rightly drives the outcome quite often. Yeah. And just one question, and it's a more general question really, on the environmental strategy piece. And I'm just wondering, do you kind of do any work around root cause analysis? Because quite often we'll see, don't we, that something falls down because a key person was off, or I think in one of these as well, a governance group had stopped meeting. And I'm just wondering, you know, how isolated that is, or do we kind of step back and say, you know, are there actually some root causes across the business that we can maybe foresee this in some other areas as well?
Yeah, we certainly do root cause analysis when we come up with a finding, and you'll know all the theories about root cause analysis from your audit background. I think one of the things that we're probably not great at is sort of the dots between all of the findings and where there's common themes, and we need to get a bit better at that. And it's something that, you know, the committee has discussed in the past, is how we share some of that corporate knowledge. If we find an issue in one area, how do we connect those dots to say, actually, that could be happening elsewhere? We need to make sure that it's not happening, and if it is, mitigate it. We're not sort of there yet with that, and I think it's a shame that Melissa's gone, because her organisational learning team, they do collect and look at all of the actions that are coming out, things like the thematic inspections, the audit reports, things that they pick up from a risk perspective, and they are starting to build that organisational learning regime. I'm not sure whether there's a root cause analysis approach to that, but it's definitely organisational learning approach.
Yeah, I just think that, you know, is where we've kind of seen value from audits, you know, internal audit, external audit, and other forms of external assurance, of being able to pull that together, and that thematic analysis then coming to audit committee, because you're kind of, you know, stepping back and being much more strategic about saying, what is it that are some of the drivers? You know, we've already seen that, you know, there's some, you know, some underfunding. You can only spend each pound once, and you've got to be really careful about that. And sometimes that can drive some of the issues. So I think there might be some value in, you know, perhaps looking to do that going forward.
I would completely agree with that. I mean, it's been really helpful from my perspective. The environmental team fall within the corporate asset management group that sit in my portfolio, and it's been really helpful, the work that the audit team have done in terms of, it's really identical, because I did that sit back and had somebody covering maternity leave for the person that's been away. You've seen some key ticks in the boxes on the stuff that's been done. What's missing there for it? It genuinely has been, I think. And that step back moment helps, because it's a bit of a perfect storm, because in addition to that strategy work being done, we're doing a restructure of the management tiers within that department as well. And actually, a bit of learning for me is, you know, somebody there that could do with a little bit more management kind of, you know, steer and oversight to help us continue that governance process through. So absolutely, that definitely will help in the future as well.
Mine was on the follow-ups, and taking a look at, I suppose, how the report is structured, and to open up, and over half of the report is overdue actions, and you always recognise that things can be well intentioned, you want to get stuff done, but then life gets in the way, and it's never quite as easy, and people can at times be a bit heroic. We'll get this done in 3 months, but you know they're not. So there can be a number of things, and some very, very good reasons why things go overdue. I don't think we'd want to be excessively harsh to that one. I think my point, just to reflect back to this, is where we've got these updates, I think the clearer they are about, we've done this, but we haven't done this, and we will do this by this point, I think will give committee a lot more assurance about it will get done at some stage, rather than, well, where will it be at the next meeting? And the next meeting, it's always open from that. And that might just then support completion of these within the time scales or close to. So observation people to take back on that.
I think that was something that we discussed at the last meeting when I was asked, do we allow revision dates? And previously we haven't, because we haven't really had a system that manages that process, but we are looking to change our systems in April. So if it's something that the force, the OPCC and the committee want, we can move to have revision dates, but I think we need to be conscious that revision dates can often mask the original. So we need to find a balance of capturing both, because you don't want to be something to have been open and it's masked by a revision date.
I don't think that would, to keep knocking them back, I don't think would help. But I think having those updates to say, this is where it is, and then we can come to a round view on it all.
I think the point you made earlier as well, that's really helpful, is the fact that actually people should be realistic about their implementation. From an audit perspective, sorry, actually, I can't say we, but from an audit perspective, one would expect if somebody's reasonable with their timelines, but actually not saying, yes, I'll do it in a week, for example, it's much better to have that reasonable one for us to work from, because that genuinely can be done in time. So,
yeah, and it's something we're pushing back on now is when somebody gives a management action and it's got ongoing or to be confirmed, and we do push back and say we need to clear a date from you to sort of go back and follow up, hold you to account on it. So we are pushing back a little bit more and asking for more realistic specific target dates. But, it can be difficult, can't it, if there's a turnover of staff, back to the kind of root causes, and also if there are interdependencies. If you need a department over here to do something before you can do your thing. So I think, there is some complexity and a lot of nuance actually to that. Very hard to balance. It really is, absolutely. Finding the balance, I think, is the hardest thing.
But I think we noted last time that in terms of the longer standing recommendations that are overdue, it's not so much the number as that there are three areas where the majority haven't yet been implemented. So, and we know in a couple of those there's something ongoing. But then the worry is whether there is the will, if we're quite blunt about it. So I think, those are the areas that we do as a committee. We all need to keep having an eye on where we are with them and a realistic explanations as to where they are. Yeah.
And I'd also welcome feedback on whether this is too much information that you're getting, because it's sort of grown over the last 8 years, hasn't it, Chair, in terms of, a member asks for something, we deliver it and it just keeps on growing and growing. So if there's any suggestions from you as to if it's too much, too little, you want more, or in a different format, please let me know.
On the other hand, the number of overdue recommendations that we're seeing is a good deal less. Yes, rather like the HMI recommendations that we're overdue with. So we're not seeing years and years and years of inaction now.
One of the point on the standards, God bless them. Mate of my wife at the moment. I just encourage taking a considered view on them, because as the internal auditors have tried to summarise, condense, bring it down, it's got to 120 odd pages. And the IIA's had a helpful tool to help you work out where you are, which has made me understand less where I comply with it. What I'd say is take the principles, to them, bring those through. And if there's something where you think it'll just be too much to comply with the letter to this, I'd rather that you popped it out there and disclosed that, rather than have to suffer a piece of paper that no one's ever going to read again.
100%, because you're not a corporate bank. We don't have hundreds of auditors. It's a small team. That's what I was just going to say. We are a small team. We won't be able to comply with all of it. It's just about being open and honest about what we can do and can't. So, but I am waiting for SIP for guidance rather than IIA, because that's what we're used to and following. So hopefully SIP for guidance will be a little shorter and clearer.
Yeah, don't think so.
Summarise it to 250 pages.
Well, SIP's Code of Practice and Local Authority Accounting now weighs in at over 1,400 pages.
Yes.
And I'm not even joking. I wish I was.
Sorry, I just got one more point actually, just thinking about it. The helpful conversation that we had, earlier from the Deputy Chief Constable about, how the kind of culture is changing of the organisation. I'm wondering whether you're seeing that come through to audit as well, because presumably if it's changing, you should be able to see that in audit with the number of recommendations.
I think my only other observation would be, as the only police officer in the room, is having been a chief officer for half a decade, I understand internal and external audit and some of the things that I've done outside of policing. I don't think I understood a word of it as a chief inspector or as a superintendent, and that's the reality. Is these are busy people with big bits of operational policing. Probably getting an email from a routine thinking, who's this? What asking me about whatever it is? So it is a slow and iterative process, and we have a senior leaders day once a quarter, which is everybody of chief inspector and above, so the same rank as Fiona, everybody of that rank and above, and police staff equivalent. And with what do they want briefing on? They want briefing on counter-terrorism, things that are exciting. But we've taken the time to brief them on audit and governance and risk management, just to start to kind of plant those things. This is really important, because yes, we've got all this operational stuff to do, but we also spend nearly £1 billion of public money every year. We employ 12,000 people. running a big complex organisation. So I think we're getting there, but it will be slow.
I think when I first started here 8 or 9 years ago, actually Audit didn't have a relationship with the command team. It was very much, they were going to local policing areas, looking in the safe and reporting to the chief inspector. So I think we've come a long way to turn that on its tail and start with, okay, we've got a portfolio lead at the top of the organisation. They're the ones where the terms of reference will be reported to, and they're the ones who will have to sign off the report and the management actions that are agreed. So I think we've sort of turned it the other way around now, and there's a better understanding at force exec level about what assurance, what audit, what governance, and the importance of it, which is, that's a better position for all of us to be in.
We are many things in Halice, but one of the things that we are is visibly hierarchical. We are. So every organisation is hierarchical. We're visibly hierarchical because we walk around dressed like this. But an email from Lynn and her team to a superintendent somewhere, CC'd to me, has an impact. So yeah, I don't say that in a sort of judgmental. It just does, because people suddenly think, oh, this must be important because the DEP's interested in it, and that's why we should keep investing in it. And Lynn and I discussed the audit schedule and all of those things, because if I said, I don't care, I'm not interested, then the organisation would say, well, it doesn't matter. It's not all about it.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, Lynn. So I think that brings us to the anti-fraud, bribery and corruption policy, which Jane is going to present.
I will, Chair, but I do feel a little bit of a fraud in doing so. Because it would normally be me.
No.
And I've sort of inherited it. And obviously working in this type of organisation that we work in, you'd expect us to have due oversight to this. But this is the strategic sort of bringing together and sort of gives a framework to all of the other policies that sit beneath it, and some explanation as to how fraud and the reporting of fraud and issues around conduct occurs in a complicated policing kind of organisation, which I understand relatively little. I understand my role in it, because that's the bit where people might commit a fraud by spending money that they shouldn't. So if you do have any questions, please write them down and go and ask somebody and then come back. Perfectly honest.
Okay.
But he was actually the head of professional standards who helped me, and indeed Lynn, who helped me update this policy. So it would be them that I prefer.
Have you got any questions? I have one suggestion.
Yeah.
Might sound a bit fancy, but if you go to section 6, detection, 6.2 talks about internal audit work. 6.3 says it's the responsibility of management to detect and prevent and detect fraud. I wonder if those two paragraphs would be better the other way around. So we start with the clarity that it's the responsibility of management to prevent and detect fraud, and then we talk about the internal audit work, supporting it, and then the best efforts beyond that.
Yeah, happy to do that. We can revise that and say we.
It will be revised.
It will be revised.
I think so. This is
More responsible for the word or revising.
And that's going to open more about tone, I think.
No, but I think logically you're right. They should be the other way around. Yeah. Good stuff. That's very helpful. We do on an annual basis we do get a report on actually what's being reported, what's being acted. You'll see how the policy plays out in terms of what's happening in the force next time then in December. Yeah.
Really like it. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Okay, that's good. So I don't know whether Sue got a message that said, "Oh, Jane,
We were both to do it.
that timing couldn't have been better." You've not got a nameplate. So do you want to introduce yourself too? Because we've got new members of the committee, I'm sure Russell probably got one. But let's say before you introduce it, I think because we've got plenty of time this afternoon, and treasury management is quite often, it's a paper that we spend 5 minutes on because we know how well managed it all is. But it might be the ideal opportunity to make sure that our new members, are fully au fait with what the system is and, who's working on it. And then you'll go back to being, 5 minutes because we will understand it.
Okay, yeah, so I'm Sue Dunham, Head of Financial Accounting and Tax. So I've been in post just over a year as well myself, actually. So I hope I can answer all your questions. So this is quite a new report, actually, because normally we give a forecast out prior to year end, but it makes more sense to provide it after year end. So we're providing it a little bit later than we usually would do. So it's 20 last year. But just to give you a bit of background, in regards to treasury management and policing, the Commission is legally required to produce an annual investment strategy, and this is included as part of the Treasury Strategy Statement, which is normally approved around the March meeting each year. The Commission is responsible for administering the capital programme, so any surplus revenue money and other reserves, they are invested on a daily basis until they are required, and then the Commissioner follows the Code of Practice for Treasury Management and the Prudential Code produced by SIPA. That's the fact that we probably already know all that. So in terms of the outturn report for up to the 31st of March 2024, so just to also give you another, which everybody else probably knows, but you won't, for the new members' benefit, we use Link Treasury Services as our external treasury advisors. And so they give us a lot of information and analyse what we're doing and give us advice in terms of what the market's doing. So last year, we actually ended on, we made 7 million in interest on investments, and our budget was 5 million, so we exceeded that. It was obviously a very good year for investments and interest rates, and the rate of return was very good. In terms of this year, because we've obviously moved on quite a bit as well, our current budget is, was 3.5 million, and we've just upped that to 6 million as well, so we're still seeing good rates of return at the moment. All our borrowing is with PWRB. And as at the 31st of March, the balance was 84.5 million, which was all at fixed rates and repayable up to 2072. The average rate of interest payable on debt during the year was 3.17%. And there was an opportunity to repay some loans early last year with PWRB, where we received some discounts. So we did some analysis and we actually paid back 2 loans amounting to 20 million. So that reduced the overall debt to from 104.5 million to 84.4, which reduced our overborrowed position. And we received a discount of 1.5 million, which was applied to the principal sum. Average interest earned on investments up to the end of March was 5.71%, and the SONIA average was 5.19%. So we still did quite well. Had a very good rate of return last year. We also invest with money market funds. Last year we had 2 money market funds, which this year we've increased to 3, and our counterparty limits are 30 million within each fund. So the money market funds last year generated interest of 2.6 million in total. So in terms of last year, in regards to breaches, we did exceed our NatWest current account balance. Now, the limit is 65 million. We did go over that over 3 months, a total of 15 days, where there was cash held in excess of 65 million. This was due to peaks in grant payments received and the timing of making suitable investments. But since then, there have been no further breaches. But since then, also, we do have somebody that's dedicated looking at investments because we were short-staffed at that point as well. So now we have somebody that's dedicated to that. And this year, that's not happened. We've not breached at all. And that's it in terms of a summary of last year. But if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask.
I'd just like to get some kind of idea of the kind of size of the team to manage this, really.
Well, in terms of the team, so we're the financial accounting team, and so I'm head of financial accounts, and then I've got 3 financial accountants, and one financial accountant looks at the cash flow. So this was a post that was created last year that's dedicated to cash flow forecasting, so that we're actually maximising our investment returns as well. And it's done really well since she started. So I think Sonia's been in post now for about 6 months, and we've seen already the budget for this year, we've increased from 3.5 million to 6 million. So it goes to show that if it's looked after well, it will work effectively.
So you're kind of managing your kind of treasury management risk now
Yeah.
better with that post. Wow, okay, that's quite impressive.
So this is one of those really interesting areas we talked about. So, Chair, if I may, before we get started the formal meeting, as far as the relationship that the Force and the OPCC has from a financial governance perspective. So, as Sue said, the Commissioner is effectively responsible for our treasury management activities through his CFO in Jane. However,
the treasurer.
absolutely, yeah, the Treasurer. And Sue obviously works within the Force Finance team to provide that service. So it's just one of those quirks of the way the governance works. But actually, our performance in treasury management compared to kind of budgeted, and we do try and budget on a prudent basis. So hopefully we will exceed. But it is very good performance that we had last year, and we continue to anticipate the remainder of this year with a relatively small team. But the assurances that we do drive within Force and our lead, obviously, all the kind of those broader treasurer responsibilities, and comments to Jane is the fact that we do work with Link as our key advisors, as a lot of other organisations do as well. But that's a key part of kind of how we ensure that we comply as well.
So on a kind of a monthly basis, what happens is Sue and her team prepare a monthly statement, and I go through that with Sue, and with Devinda, was she the assistant director?
Yeah.
Finance. So we're only uncertain at the moment because you've had a number of changes of
There will be
titles.
some further
Don't want to upset anybody. Typically it kind of splits between the short and the medium term. So I'm worrying about the capital financing requirement and the MTFP over kind of 4 or 5 years, and the everyday then tends to come back to the Force. But for example, when we looked at the sort of slight over borrowing position, it wasn't that we had borrowed too much. Okay, that wasn't where we were. We borrowed as we're allowed to do in advance of spend, and the spend just had not occurred. So because of the very unusual position in the marketplace with those rates being so high, but the market anticipating that the rate would come down, there was this wonderful little narrow window of opportunity to repay some debt and get a good discount on it, which Link actually confirms those. So we actually ended up taking a very quick note of the Monday morning Chiefs meeting, so that we just had complete cover from the debt, the PCC, Chief Executive, Pete and myself to say because we needed to act quickly, that we would get in and utilise that window and get the repayment done. So again, it's a good example of how we act in concert to deliver all of our responsibilities. Because it's the budget sits on your side, isn't it? Sometimes in some policing bodies, it's actually sits with the PCC.
Yeah.
So it's curious. One of our many curiosities.
Does all over performance against budget go back to paying off outstanding borrowing? Or
No, it goes to the bottom line. So in when you come to learn a lot of our statutory accounts, the public sector way of accounting is that we take on board all of the IFRS adjustments, and then as we go through the revenue reserve statement, we reject them all. So we say, thank you very much. We've accounted for the pension liability that we'll never pay, and all the annual leave that we'll never pay, all the depreciation that we don't charge. That's the position. Now, reality, we look at how much money we actually need to have in the bank. We'll just take all of those out and we'll put this back in, and then that's the real number. So we don't hypothecate any of the interest towards debt repayment per se. It just goes to the bottom line. But it's one of the wonderful worlds of statutory accounting in the public sector. Sorry, Lauren, I'm being terribly flippant, but you understand what I'm saying. We do everything properly and then we reverse it. Pretty much, yeah.
my income's negative?
Yeah, starting our pensions profit amount.
didn't even touch on pensions this morning. At some point, we will have a little
Yes,
briefing
we'll
on
bring you up to date with the kind of pensions.
Yes.
Police officer scheme.
Lauren and her colleagues will spend enormous amounts of time worrying about it, and but it's worth being briefed on. Members of this
Include that in your.
Yeah.
I think just one thing, I hope we've provided you with the Treasury Management Strategy for this year, because it's kind of a key document for you to have. If we haven't, we can circulate it. Okay, so maybe it's worth us making sure we've got a medium-term financial plan and the capital strategy.
I think Lynn's been trying not to swamp people, haven't you, with all the documents, but given the context now, those would be useful documents for sending out,
One of the key things about the way that we do Treasury is we don't do Treasury simply for profit. We do it within the constraints of the Treasury Management Strategy. And within that, we have a code of practice. The code of practice says that we only borrow and lend money for our operational requirements. We don't do it for itself. So whereas perhaps in a charity, you would see returns of well beyond 6 and 7%, that's because they can borrow and lend at risk. We try to limit risk as much as we can because it's the public's money, and the Treasury Management Strategy will help you really understand that. So it's got all the counterparty limits, who we can and can't do business with. It's not just that we go for AAA, we go for AAA, public sector, UK, money market funds only. It is very, very low risk. Where you've got low risk, you get low return. So the only benefit, the real benefit where Sue and her team can bring it in is to be as accurate as possible to know where we can put what for how much. And happily in policing, our cash flow is very simple. We get a whole load every month just before we run the payroll, happy days. And then on an annual basis, we get the pension money, pension grant from the Home Office, comes in July, and it gradually winnows down. So in July, we have about 120, 140 million on lend, and then that gradually comes down to the following June. And then by June, it pretty much represents the amount we've got in reserves. And that's really what it does. So it's fairly simple to see from space, isn't it, our cash flow, to be honest. But getting that right on a daily basis, placing with the right people, spotting which local authority is still good for the money, but happy to pay a bit extra in terms of basis points, that's where I think it's really been the benefit.
I think it's probably fair to say all is still done with the historic memory of Iceland, because that did badly affect and seriously worry for quite a long while. West Midlands Police, that was before I arrived, but I still remember the headlines that it caused. So I think the shadow of that is still visible in the both in the policy and in the way that people actually do the job here.
I was going to ask a question about, a comment within here about the balance between security and liquidity, but I take it that the strategy will answer that. So I'll look through.
Okay, is that all in terms of questions? So thanks very much, Sue, and we'll circulate those background papers. I think that will help. Thanks a lot. Which brings us on to Laura, who's here from Grant Thornton, who's going to present her report on audit findings and an update on where we are this year. So Laura, over to you.
Just for your information, I'm Laura Griffiths. I'm the director of Grant Thornton, based in our office over on Cornwall. This is my first year as kind of engagement lead for the West Midlands Police Audit, taking over from Andrew Smith, but I have been involved on and off for over a decade, I think. So it's odd walking back into this building. So in a normal year, this sort of September committee is the point at which we'd be hoping to report our final findings for the audit. There are a couple of pages at the front of the report just setting out sort of the wider context of local government audit and the fact that we're not really in a normal year. So although this isn't a final report, I think that the kind of key message from us is that in general things are going well. Progress has been really good. The engagement we're getting from the finance team has been really good. So I'll just sort of run through the key points from the report as we see them. So the first one being that the work that we do is based on the concept of materiality. So we look for errors that would fundamentally change the way that somebody would interpret the set of financial statements. So for the audit of West Midlands Police, we set that threshold at £12.5 million. And the way we determine that is we look at the sort of three separate sets of accounts. We look at the Chief Constable, the Commissioner of the group, and we basically set that threshold at the one that would be the lowest across the three, so that we're definitely catching everything. We have a trivial threshold, so items below which we define to be clearly trivial under the auditing standards. So that threshold is £625,000. If we identify any issues above that threshold, they'll be reported in our audit findings report, whether or not they are adjusted in the accounts. And we do have a lower materiality threshold for the officer's remuneration disclosure, just because of the public interest in that note. The report then sets out kind of progress against the areas that we've identified as the significant risk of material misstatement. So the first one is the presumed risk, which is presumed under the standards of management of override and controls. So you'll see that in any audit reporting for any audit. Our work in this area is now complete, which is a little bit further along than it was at the point we drafted the report. Still subject to kind of final quality reviews by the manager and myself, but nothing has come out of that at this point in time. We then have to consider the rebuttable presumed risk of fraud in revenue recognition, and in public sector we also consider the equivalent in expenditure, because most bodies the expenditure is more complex than the income. And we've just to confirm, we've determined that there's no significant risk there, and we haven't identified anything that would change that assessment. And then the other two significant risks are the valuation of the PCC's properties and the valuation of the Chief Constable's pension liability. And those are significant risks, basically because they're very big numbers, they're estimated, it's very complex, and even just a very small error in them can be a very big change. In terms of the valuations work, it's fairly early days on that. There's nothing major coming out of that report at this point. We're working through the information that the valuer has provided us with. There's likely to be a few things that we'll need to refer to our own valuation experts, but no big concerns at this point in time. And then in terms of the work on the pension liability, that work is essentially as complete as it can be at this point in time. We are still waiting on assurances from the auditor of the West Midlands Pension Fund, which we are still expecting this month. It's quite common that as part of that information, there will be some differences in the audit of the West Midlands Pension Fund. So there will be something in our AFR probably that talks about kind of differences in the pension fund audit and the impact that that has on West Midlands Police. But I think the key point, as Jane sort of alluded to, the differences in the property valuations and differences in the pension valuations, for the most part, don't impact on the general fund. They don't impact on sort of council taxpayers. They get moved into separate reserves and they just sort of unwind themselves over time. Our work in other areas is pretty well progressed. A lot of it's still subject to review, but there's nothing coming out of it at this point in time, other than we have requested some extra bits of information be put into the AGSs. And that's as exciting as it gets at this point. And then in terms of our value for money work, so alongside the audit of the financial statements, we do a piece of work that considers the governance arrangements in place. And we focus on kind of three key areas that are set out in the codes. Those areas are financial sustainability, the arrangements to secure that financial sustainability, the arrangements around governance, and the arrangements to secure economy, efficiency and effectiveness. So we've kind of done our initial risk assessment for that. At this point in time, the only thing that has come out of that is that obviously we'll need to follow up on the work that was done last year in response to the HMRC FRS findings. But we're not expecting there to be any other significant issues that will be discussed in that work. So we will obviously follow up on everything that was discussed earlier in this meeting and kind of get up to speed and up to date for what happened during the 23-24 year. The bulk of that work is planned for the next couple of months, so we may be in a position to bring the audit findings and the BFM findings to the next meeting, hopefully. And I think that's about it. The remainder of the report just sets out other information we're required to provide to you around compliance with ethical standards, confirms our planned audit fees for the year, which you may have spotted are higher than last year, and that's because it's the first year of the new local government audit contract. And just to flag that the fees around the use of expert, that's our kind of property valuation expert. So if anything complex happens there, that number might go up a little bit. And that was what I was planning to say, but happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions from members?
No questions from me.
A quick one, this might be a little early, but do you have a post-audit wash-up to review how the audit process went? And is there anything at this point that's worth flagging up about what might be discussed at that? Either way.
So yes, we don't necessarily always have, like if an audit goes very smoothly, we may not sort of have one, but we always offer. I don't think from our side there's anything in particular that we would be looking to discuss at that meeting this year. This is where I throw to see who disagrees.
But often things that we have to wait for, really interestingly, is our respective kind of advisors or experts, expert in terms of the kind of the property valuation, and indeed the forces property valuer. At times, if there is a kind of go between, a difference in view and value, and the issue around the audit of the pension fund, because that's the West Midlands pension fund it's got a separate auditor, as we've said. So often it's a case of actually where we do.
Isn't it? It is Bramble.
Yeah, it is, but not. But obviously, with all of the ethical rules and so on, it's a kind of different. So it's often those things that actually kind of delay later kind of the ideal opinions after all the work's been done, usually very smoothly together and very quickly. I think we've got a good track record of working well together. We really want to keep building on that, and we do take the opportunity if there are things we think actually that could be a bit different. On both sides, we'll do. But
it can be awkward at times getting the right information. Posing the question, posing a way that's understood, getting information from that. Getting it back in a way that's understood, but by the sound of it, that's not too awkward a process.
All the stuff that we can provide, we normally provide quite timely. It's we have a catch up with auditors every week anyway. So if there's anything lost in translation, we normally discuss that. I think it's the stuff that's beyond our control, that's external to us, is what our hands are then tied. So.
Well, I mean, hopefully, just in terms of your assessment of the appeal findings, the debate discussion that we had earlier might have been a useful one for you to have heard. So we'll wait and see how you respond to that. I think at our next meeting, I think we are scheduled to have our annual private meeting for members with Grant Thornton. So just on a very practical point, Lauren, I think that meeting is also an afternoon meeting rather than more because the time. I mean, clearly our new members. For our new members, this is the normal. But traditionally, we've met at a different time of day, at a different time of the month, on a different day of the week. What would suit you better? Because potentially, I'm imagining we could arrange to meet you before the meeting at a set time, rather than at the close of a meeting at an indeterminate time. On a day in December, you might prefer the former, but I'm just what would suit you, or are you completely easy?
I think we're pretty flexible, especially with 3 months' notice.
Okay. Well, we'll liaise on that offline, but potentially we'll do it the other way around. Excellent, thank you. So item 12 is just the work programme, and don't anticipate that changing between now and December. But we do occasionally, we get halfway through the year and we think actually, this might shift or that might shift. So we'll see. And I think that concludes our business.
Just that, was the private meeting with head of internal audit?
There is supposed to be a private meeting at the end, but we.
Now,
we can-
with
yeah,
you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine, but that's part of the meeting with, so, good. Thank you, everybody. I think that's been really helpful. Hopefully our new members have, are now feeling a good deal more, as it were, in tune with where we are than they were when they came to the building at 10 o'clock this morning. So thanks very much. And we'll let everybody depart before we then move back to the board. You can